few summers ago, I decided I wanted to go somewhere new all by myself. I needed a break from everyone and wanted to enjoy nature and quiet. I found a cabin for rent in Maine that looked just right. I had never been to Maine before, but I always wanted to see it. The cabin was close to the Basin Preserve. The place was stunning, and the weather was just perfect, especially for late July. Coming from the heat of Kansas City, I was used to staying inside with the air conditioner on during this time of year. I spent some very peaceful days relaxing and hiking. One day I even found a wonderful spot to pick blueberries. It felt so nice and calm, just the opposite of the busy city life I had been living. My cabin was nestled deep in the woods, and it had a really cozy porch that quickly became my favorite spot. I love staying up late, so one night I decided to sit on the porch with a book. I used my headlamp to see the pages. It was around 1 a.m, and I was so into my book that I couldn't stop reading. Suddenly, I heard a loud cracking sound, like someone stepping on a big branch. At first, I didn't think much of it because I was very focused on my book, but then I heard the sound again. This time I turned my headlamp to its brightest setting and pointed the light towards the woods. To my surprise, about 8 feet off the ground, I saw 2 huge eyes shining back at me. The eyes were bright golden yellow and slanted. They were looking straight at me. I'm not very good at judging distances, but I think the eyes were about 20 yards away. When I saw those eyes, a strong feeling of fear came over me. I was trying to figure out how tall the creature was by comparing the eyes to the height of the outhouse that stood between us and slightly to the side. Apart from the eyes, I couldn't see anything else before I quickly ran inside the cabin. Once inside, I locked the doors and hurried around the house, feeling very scared and searching for anything I could use as a weapon. I managed to close all the windows except one that was too high up and needed a tool to reach. Through that open window screen, I could hear the creature slowly walking toward the cabin. The steps sounded heavy, like they were from something walking on 2 legs. It kept walking back and forth in front of the cabin, its steps making a steady noise. Then all of a sudden, everything went completely quiet. I was very frightened, but I made myself look out the window. Peeking through the side of the curtain, I couldn't see anything. Suddenly, I heard a howl that sounded like a mix between a wolf and a person in terrible pain. The A-frame cabin had a loft, so I decided to climb up the ladder to see if I could spot anything from the upper window. The backyard of the cabin was surrounded by a bamboo fence that was about 6 feet tall. Looking out the window, I saw the backyard lit by the porch light. All of a sudden, something jumped over the fence into the yard. It leapt over the tall fence with ease. This creature was enormous, standing at least 7 feet tall. It had a long snout and sharp teeth. Its fur was black, with a thick ruff around its neck. It was incredibly strong and muscular, like a bodybuilder. Its head looked like a giant wolf's head, but it was 2 or 3 times the size of a normal wolf's head. The creature kept pacing outside and then disappeared from view before reappearing closer to the house, tapping on the windows. By then, I was nearly scared to death. I wanted to call someone, maybe the police or anyone who could help, but I couldn't get any signal on my phone. Then that frightening howl echoed again. It returned into view, sniffing the air with its ears twitching, before moving back to stand next to the fence. I silently begged it to go away. Fear filled my entire body. My hands were sweating, and my heart was beating so fast. Suddenly it leaped back over the fence. I listened carefully, but heard no footsteps fading away. I prayed that it had truly gone and wasn't just hiding nearby. I tried to calm down and breathe slowly, but I was really shaken up. I didn't want to stay at the cabin anymore, but I didn't dare go outside to my car. I stayed up in the loft all night. There was a futon up there, but it wasn't comfortable, and I couldn't sleep anyway. Early in the morning, I packed all my things and checked every window to make sure that creature wasn't around. Then I quickly ran to my car and drove away. I had paid for a whole week at the cabin, but I knew I'd never go back there again. I drove to Phippsburg and found a hotel to stay in. I called the owner of the cabin and tried to explain what happened. I got really upset talking about it again, and maybe he felt sorry for me because he gave me all my money back. Or maybe he just didn't want any bad stories about his place. He told me he'd never heard of a creature like that in those woods before. He said he'd report it to the authorities, but I'm not sure if he did. I'm just glad I got away safely. I don't know how to make this story sound believable. As far as I know, I'm the only person who has ever encountered this creature. Nobody I've talked to has heard of it, and I can't find anything about it online either. But I know what I saw. I saw it clearly with my own eyes in the middle of the day, so I couldn't have mistaken it for something else. To give you some background, I am a big fan of your show and watch it regularly from my home in Caruthersville, Arkansas. However, this story takes place a little east of home at Reelfoot Lake in the northwestern corner of Tennessee. I love fishing and was out on the lake one day last summer. I was trying my best to catch a couple of big catfish for a fish fry I had promised my brothers who were visiting the next weekend. My fish finder showed several large fish swimming directly below me. Even though it was the hottest part of the day and I was hungry, thirsty, and almost out of ice water, I wasn't moving until I had caught at least one or two. It was extremely hot that day, and I was all alone on the boat. I hadn't seen another boat in over an hour by the time I saw something unusual. I reached into the cooler for my last bottle of ice water and then took a seat at the front of the boat. I cast out my line and sat quietly, waiting for a fish to bite. As I wiped the sweat off my forehead, something bumped the underside of the boat. It wasn't a hard bump, but it was strong enough to almost knock me out of my seat. I felt like I had to move and look down into the water to figure out what it was. At first glance, I couldn't see anything. I gave up trying to see anything big in the water and went back to my seat to take another sip of ice water. I thought it must have been a tree just below the surface of the water that I had passed over, or maybe one of those big catfish that were teasing me from below. Just as I was almost sitting back down, another big bump hit the bottom of the boat. This time I dropped my water bottle, spilling the last of it into the boat. This made me very upset, so I went back to the edge of the boat to search again. I was determined to find out what was causing these bumps, even if it was hard to see. I decided to grab one of the oars and poke around under the boat to see if anything would come up. When I stuck the oar under the boat, something grabbed onto it tightly for a second or two. Then I pulled the oar back up and saw that the paddle part was missing. Whatever was under my boat had bitten it clean in two. At this point, I decided to start the boat motor and get away from there. I couldn't imagine what it might be. My first thought was that someone had let loose a pet alligator or something similar. The motor turned over once before it died. I tried again, and it died again. On the third attempt, it wouldn't even start. I lifted the propeller out of the water to see if something was stuck and found that all the blades were either broken off or bent. If it was an alligator down there, it must have had very tough skin to do all that damage. I picked up my phone to call for help, and that's when it started to rise to the surface. Under my boat, believe me, I am not making this up, there was a snapping turtle at least 15 feet wide. It looked like a snapping turtle, but I wasn't sure it actually was one. Its head was about as big as my torso. It stared at me with its huge eyes, and I could see its rough, scaly skin. I was frozen in place, not sure what to do next. I knew I had to get away, but the boat was stuck, and the phone wasn't getting a signal. I sat very still, hoping the giant turtle would go away. After what felt like forever, the turtle finally went back underwater, and I quickly grabbed my paddle to try to row back to shore as fast as I could. Even though I was scared, I kept paddling until I finally reached the shore. I jumped out of the boat and ran to find help. When I told people about the giant turtle, no one believed me, but I knew what I had seen. That day on Reelfoot Lake was something I would never forget. I know it sounds unbelievable, but it was right there in front of me. I was so scared that this huge turtle was going to tip over my boat. Then it went back underwater, and the boat almost tipped from the strong current it created. I quickly took out my other oar and started paddling to shore. It took a long time to get back with only one oar and no motor. Remember, it was extremely hot that day, and I was very thirsty and tired by the time I reached the shore. When I finally got back, I told my friends what had happened, but none of them believed me. Still, I know what I saw. It was a giant snapping turtle, and it's a day I will never forget. On a misty, clear night in Savannah, the cold air slowly drifted along the cobblestones in the dark alleys. It was the kind of cold that pinches at your skin as you walk through the old part of town. Savannah is a beautiful place with old buildings that seem like they have many stories to share. Some people say these buildings are haunted. They believe spirits live here, forever trapped in their once cherished homes. You can feel the history in these buildings, like they're still holding on to the past. I've always been curious about this, which is why I'm drawn to these old, supposedly haunted buildings in Savannah. Part of me can't wait to see if these ghost stories are true, but another part of me thinks they're just tales. As it got darker, I decided to check out one of these buildings, an old mansion that used to be grand but now looks pretty run down. The wind made strange noises through the cracked windows and broken shutters, mixing with the distant sounds of the city. It was very calm and peaceful, yet there was an unusual stillness that made the hair on my neck stand up. I walked past the old broken fence and onto the front porch. My footsteps echoed in the quiet, making me shiver. The wood creaked under my boots, and the old mansion looked even more spooky under the dim moonlight. When I stepped inside, it was so dark that my flashlight hardly made a difference. I could see hints of the mansion's grand past. The banisters once had elegant spirals, but now they were covered in dust. The wallpaper was hanging off the wall, peeling and torn. It felt like the place was frozen in time, with memories echoing in the air. The cool wind outside had turned to a breathless chill indoors, and the ice-cold wooden floors made the place feel even more eerie. As I continued to wander through the aged mansion, I saw broken relics from another era and faded fragments of furniture. I chanced upon a staircase. As I climbed the creaky steps into the pitch black, my heart thudded loudly in my chest. Suddenly I heard a noise that was not my own. It was a strange clicking sound, like someone tapping a pipe. The sound was really light, but clear. Then, another noise soon followed, a low scratching, a soft echo that seemed like something dragging itself across the floor, moving quickly from one point of the room to another. The unsettling sounds in the silence seemed to be closing in, drawing nearer with each passing moment. A wave of unease washed over me as curiosity wrestled with fear. Part of me thought it was just the old house playing tricks on my mind, but another part really wanted to see what was hiding in the dark. Gathering my courage, I stepped forward and rounded the corner. My flashlight's weak beam swept across an old, run-down ballroom. It got colder, like the draft was wrapping around me, sending a shiver through my body. The feeling of anticipation suddenly changed into something else, dread. The once intriguing darkness now felt unwelcome, stifling. My usual disbelief disappeared, leaving me feeling exposed in the growing darkness. In the far edge of the room, I thought I saw the shadows shift, forming a vague silhouette different from the surrounding gloom. That subtle distinction made my heart skip a beat. A bunch of thoughts flashed through my mind: the mansion, the ghost stories, the strange sounds, and then that shape that didn't belong. The ballroom, once grand and full of life, now felt like it held secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. The chandelier, now broken and dusty, hung like a ghost of the past. The faded, torn curtains fluttered slightly, even though there was no breeze. Each step I took felt heavier, as if the mansion was trying to hold me back. I remembered the stories people told about this place. They said the mansion was haunted by the spirits of those who once lived there. They spoke of ghostly figures seen in the windows and mysterious sounds heard at night. As I stood there staring at the shifting shadows, I began to wonder if those stories were true. With my heart pounding, I took another step forward. The silhouette seemed to move, almost as if it was aware of my presence. I couldn't tell if it was real or just my imagination running wild. The air felt thick, and the quiet was so intense that even my breathing sounded loud. Then the clicking sound came again, followed by the low scratching. It was closer now, more distinct. The shadows shifted once more, and I could feel the tension building inside me. Every instinct told me to turn back, but my curiosity pushed me on. I had to know what was causing these noises, what was hiding in the darkness of the old mansion. As I stood there, the flashlight flickering, I realized that sometimes the stories we hear might have a bit of truth in them. The mansion was more than just an old, abandoned building. It was a place filled with history, memories, and perhaps a few lingering spirits. It was then I finally saw it, the crawler. The shape started to move gracefully, almost floating above the tattered remains of what might have once been a polished oak floor. This figure was very thin and much taller than any normal person, crawling around on all fours. It moved quickly, like it was hunting. Its eyes seemed to swallow whatever slight light broke the darkness, leaving behind twin pools of utter blackness. I couldn't see a nose or any clear features, just a huge mouth that looked like it was opening into a bottomless pit. I was shivering, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it over that unsettling clicking sound echoing around. The room suddenly felt smaller, the ceiling lower, and my flashlight beam dimmer. I felt a rush of adrenaline telling me to run, but I couldn't move or look away from it. Dread turned to primal fear, and fear turned to instinct. Before I knew it, I was backing away, finally able to move. I kept my eyes on that thing, the crawler, as I moved back as fast as I could. Another shiver ran through me, and I could swear it was watching me too, following my every move. When I finally got outside, I could breathe again, and the fear started to fade. I was out of that mansion, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of that encounter with the crawler. For the first time, I wasn't just a curious visitor, I was right in the middle of the kind of ghost story I always thought was just make-believe. A while ago, something strange happened to me at the old church where I work, just outside of Chicago. It's a big church with thick stone walls and colorful stained glass windows. I was there late one night, alone as usual. There was work to be done, and that old building always felt dark inside, even during the day. I was in the back, cleaning up, when I heard a sound. It wasn't loud, but it made me stop and listen. You know how sometimes you hear something and wonder if it's real? That's how it felt. I thought maybe it was just the building settling, because old places like that can make noises. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. It was like a scratching or scraping noise coming from the main hall. I hesitated for a moment. It wasn't exactly fear, but more like a feeling of being unsure. Still, I've always believed that if something scares you, you should face it. So I decided to investigate. As I walked into the hall, I felt a sudden chill. It was a warm summer night, but the hall felt as cold as winter. The candles I had lit were out, like they had been blown by a strong wind. But everything was calm and quiet. Looking around, I noticed something odd near the altar. The shadows seemed darker than usual, even though the lights were off. They were moving strangely, almost like they were alive. Curious, I took a step closer to get a better look. That's when things got really strange. The darkness near the altar seemed to reach out towards me, almost like long fingers or thin strands. It made me freeze in place. I should have run, but I couldn't move. Then I saw it clearly for the first time, a creature emerging from the shadows. It didn't look human at all. It was all sharp angles and strange movements, like a drawing come to life. Its eyes glowed like burning coals. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. We stared at each other for what felt like a long time. I couldn't move or speak. It felt so wrong, like this creature shouldn't exist in our world. But there it was, in our church. Slowly, it started to move towards me, but then it stopped suddenly, as if it had hit an invisible wall. I was scared, but also relieved it couldn't come closer. It hovered there, its shape shifting in the darkness. Everything was quiet until the creature made a sound. It wasn't like a growl or a whisper. It was more like a feeling, like something brushing against my mind. I tried to say something back, but my voice was gone. The creature tilted its head, as if surprised that I could see it. Suddenly, a draft moved through the church, and the creature recoiled. It was strange to see it react to something as normal as a breeze. It gave me courage. Maybe this creature wasn't as powerful as it seemed. I decided to move slowly towards the light switches by the door. I wanted to flood the church with light to see what would happen. The creature watched me, but it didn't try to stop me. When I finally reached the switches and turned them on, the church was filled with sudden brightness. I squinted against the glare and looked back at the altar. The creature was gone. There was no trace of it, like it had never been there at all. But the atmosphere in the church felt different, lighter somehow. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. I thought the strange encounter was over. The rest of the night passed quietly, but I couldn't focus on my work. I sat in one of the pews, staring at the altar, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. When morning came, I felt silly, wondering if I had imagined everything. But the fear I felt that night was too real to be just my imagination. After that night, I started noticing small oddities in the church, things out of place and strange marks on the floor. The congregation also started talking about feeling uneasy or seeing things out of the corner of their eyes. I couldn't tell them what I had seen, but I knew it was the same presence lingering in our church. I decided to do something I never thought I would do. I stayed in the church overnight again, determined to confront whatever was there. As the clock approached 3 a.m, I felt a strange pressure all around me, like the air was thick with something unseen. I spoke to the presence, telling it firmly that it had no power over us. For a moment, the pressure intensified, almost suffocating. But then, suddenly, it was gone. The next morning, the church felt different, peaceful again. I couldn't explain it, but I was relieved. That's the whole story, or at least as much as I can understand. I don't know if the creature will come back, but I'm not afraid anymore. Facing it was terrifying, but I know I did the right thing. Life goes on, and our church remains our sanctuary, peaceful and safe once more. I'm not someone who believes in aliens or wild stories you might hear about Martians among us. I have a Master of Science in mathematics, and I think it's important to rely on what you can see and prove. But I had an experience that I can't ignore, and I need to tell you about it. I live in Prescott Valley, Arizona, a quiet place without all the hustle of big cities. One Sunday afternoon, I was driving along Iron Springs Road near the Granite Mountain Wilderness area. It's a peaceful drive where you can see far into the distance and sometimes spot animals like pronghorn herds. On my way back home around 5:30 in the afternoon, I saw something strange. There was a sudden flash in the sky ahead, like something exploding. I thought maybe a small plane was in trouble. I tried to call 911 but had no signal. My Nissan Pathfinder can handle rough roads, so I decided to investigate. After a few minutes, I found the crash site. I couldn't drive right up to it because it was on a rocky hill, so I got out and climbed up. When I reached the top, I couldn't believe my eyes. There was a bizarre, broken craft made of shiny silver-green material. It was all jagged and twisted. I stood there trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Suddenly, something moved near the wreckage. It wasn't a person. It was a small creature. It looked like the aliens you see in pictures. Thin body, skinny arms and legs, a big oval-shaped head, and huge black eyes. It looked injured, and even though I was scared, I felt like it was sad too. I didn't see any cuts or blood on it, but I just had this feeling that it was hurt. It was like I could sense it somehow. There might have been another one like it that didn't make it through the crash. I don't know how I knew, but I just did. I was so scared that I couldn't move. The creature stared at me, and I felt like I couldn't look away. It was like something was pulling me towards it, but then there was a loud noise, and suddenly I could move again. A bright blue light shot across the sky from the east, and a huge ship appeared overhead. I crouched down, covering my head as a beam of light from the ship hit the wreckage. It made a terrible screeching noise, and in that moment I felt like something awful was about to happen. When I could move again, I ran back to my truck as fast as I could. I drove straight to the Prescott Police Department, but they didn't take me seriously. They thought I was joking or drunk. Feeling foolish, I went home and searched online for UFO sightings. I found the National UFO Reporting Center and called them. They took me seriously and gave me a reference number, but when I called back later, they tried to tell me it was just a meteorite crash. They said the strange things I saw were just dust kicked up by the impact. But I know what I saw wasn't just dust. It was something else. I'm sure the government collected the wreckage and is hiding the truth. I wish I had taken pictures to prove it. But I want everyone to know my story and not let the truth be hidden.